Hey, my name is Jose Diaz, and I want to welcome you. I'm really glad to see this large group today. It shows that we are in the right track, and we are catching up with our friends from Europe that are, more into this. They call it SROI, social return on investment, just to differentiate it from the financial business-like concept. How many of you know about the Jeremiah program? So, okay. Anyway, I'm just going to give you a very quick summary, and people from the program will actually talk a little bit more about what they do and how they do it and what they learn in this process. The Jeremiah program is just a supportive housing program for single mothers that they want to go to college. They also provide early childhood education or care for their children. So it's a twofold program. It's education, housing, and the early childhood. We call it the second generation part of the program. Now, we haven't defined ROI yet. We've been talking for 20 minutes about it, and nobody has said what it is. And it's like the name says, it's just how many dollars you receive back. And you, when I say you, we could mean the society, we could mean the taxpayers or the participants. How many dollars do you receive back for every dollar that you put into that program? Okay? So at the end, the final result, at least what you see in the paper, in the report that your vendor will give to you at the end of this process, is just a number, a single number. So you're going to pay thousands of dollars for a number. Okay? I shouldn't say that, I guess. So we can give you, send you an email saying, this is your return, that's it. Or we can give you a full report with all the technical itty-bitties of the stuff. But at the end, it's just that, it's just a number. What I mean by that, what we learn from that is that if you think about the things that you do, that your program does, you're transforming lives. It's a nice word, we should use it. Well, we actually use it. But that's what you're doing, transforming the lives of your participants. You're helping them to, achieve stable housing, find jobs, so forth. So that's a very complex mission. Whatever your mission is, it's very, deep and meaningful and complex. So now, what we are trying to do with this ROI is to simplify and describe the economic value of that beautiful mission and compress it in one number. And that's a very hard job. So there is a caveat around ROI. It's not the whole story. It's actually the tip of the iceberg. And below the, the water level, there's a lot to tell about. And that's what the people from the program will tell you a little bit. What's behind, underneath this complete value of your program? And like sometimes I say my clients, and I'm not a storyteller. I'm just going to give you a number. You tell the story, okay? I'm very bad at telling stories, so just give you the number, you do the rest of the work, okay? So what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is tell you what are these first stages of doing this ROI. So if you call me or your vendor or another vendor, this is what's going to happen right away. So probably and hopefully this will give you an idea what it takes to jump into one of these studies, okay? And think about, I need to start thinking about data collection. I have to think about, how much time do I have to spend in doing this thing? Because it's not something that you hire a consultant and then you forget about it. There's a lot of work that you have to do in the side of the program that you have to do to make this work really well. So right when you call me, or whoever you're going to call to do this ROI, and you say, I want to do an ROI for my organization, the first thing that I'm going to tell you is, okay, stop. Before we engage in any long-term commitment, an expensive commitment, we have to get to know each other better. Okay? This is going to be a long relationship, so I want to know what is it that you do a little bit better. Okay? And the way we do it is by defining this framework, the ROI framework. And by framework, I mean all the necessary steps or the things that we need to figure out before we actually do and jump into the work. We need to define what is it that you do, how is it that you do it, what kind of data you're collecting, and all this sort of stuff. And all the assumptions, the general assumptions that we have to agree upon. Okay? So this is a good, objective, and usable work. Usually we start this process with what we call the logic model. And this is a very commonly used tool in program evaluation. You know, hire a consultant and they tell you, oh, you want to measure your outcomes? Let's do a logic model or a theory of change. Okay? And this is just a flow chart. The concept is, we borrow from the private sector. It's a production flow chart. Okay? The way we do it is sort of a backwards. We call you and say, well, we need to meet. We need to do this logic model. So we invite people from your organization, mostly leaders that know this big picture of what is it that you do, the mission, they know these itty-bitties. And program leaders are really good at that. They know what they want to achieve. So we want them in the room. But we also want people who does the day-to-day work, the itty-bitties of the activities, the daily work. So we want somebody from that level of the organization involved at this level. We also want somebody that knows the data. You know, he knows where the information is in your organization. It could be a computer person or sort of someone that is just, you know, handling the forms and collecting them, you know, this kind of job description kind of thing. So we meet for about an hour or two probably and start talking about all these things. And the first question is that we ask is, what is it that you want to accomplish? When we talk about transforming lives, what is it that you want to transform? And those are your outcomes, okay? And then we move backwards and say, well, what is it that you do to accomplish this? And what resources you use in these activities and so forth. Now, when you do it for a regular program evaluation, not an ROI, the consultant will probably ask you about your outcomes. And in the case of Jeremiah program, you don't see here, what you see here are the economic outcomes. But for a regular outcome evaluation, they probably will say something like, we want people to increase their chances to graduate from college. Okay? That's sort of the main outcome, in a way. But there is nothing intrinsically economic about graduating from college. There are some economic things around it. You have to pay for it, and hopefully you will increase your income after you graduate. But the actual outcome that you could measure in your evaluation is just how many people graduated from college because of your program, okay? For the ROI, we ask one more question. We go beyond that and say, what is the economic value of that outcome? What is the economic value of that college degree that you are obtaining? And that's when you have to call a very specific consultant that knows how to do that. Okay? Not every program evaluation knows how to do that. So you can see, in the case of Jeremiah, and by the way, we are using the Jeremiah program as the main example, but I encourage you to think about, well, how we do this if this was my program? Okay, so do that exercise. It might be helpful. So for the Jeremiah program, we have increased lifetime earnings as sort of the main economic outcome that comes from the outcome or the intermediate outcome of graduating from college. And then we have other related economic outcomes. If you have more income, you pay more taxes. That's good for taxpayers and the society. You may be likely to reduce your use of public assistance. And these last two outcomes are related to the second generation, to the kids, okay? So it's been shown before with these very famous studies about early childhood education that kids that receive early childhood education are less likely or are more likely to reduce the use of special education, non-cognitive special education. They will be less likely to commit crimes later on in life. They will be more likely to graduate from high school and college, and so forth. So those are the second generation economic outcomes. And we move backwards and see all this thing. The only different thing that you will see in terms of cost or investment in an ROI from what a financial person will tell you are these things over here, volunteer time or in-kind, things that don't appear in your financial statements. You know, what is the value of the work of your volunteers, for example, if you use them? Or if you receive in-kind donations and they are not reflected somewhere else, what's the value of that, okay? And tell you the truth, this is probably the easiest part of the ROI, because you probably know how much money is coming in. It gets complicated when you have different sources of funding and so forth. But in general, it's not too bad. The tricky part is this, when we want to measure these things. Because if you think about the ROI in a business-like environment, it's relatively easy to compute. If you're looking, the ROI of Apple computers, or the iPhone, for example, well, you count how many phones you make, how many phones you sell, at what price. That's your revenue. That's the benefit part of the ROI. But you know everything that you need to compute that number. You know the quantity and you know the prices. Now, if I ask you, what is it that you produce? Transforming lives. How many? What? It's because we are producing outcomes and not outputs. What Paul was mentioning before is a huge difference between those things. It's not how many people come through your doors. It's what is the change in the life of those people that you want to capture. Even harder, what's the price of that? Is there a market for that kind of things? Maybe not. Okay? So we need to come up with the value, the economic value of each of those degrees, college degrees that these guys are earning. Okay? So that's the tricky part. The value of having this logic model is that you will have the information about which benefits we're going to measure and which costs we're going to include here. Now, a little bit of history here, because I think it's important to understand, especially in the future, if you want to do something like that. If you think about the history of nonprofits and fundraising and all that kind of things, very early, many years ago, we have probably philanthropies and the government giving money to do some social activities, some social work. You have social entrepreneurs that have an idea, we have to solve this problem. And they look for money. The government gives them a grant, or a philanthropy or a foundation gives them a grant. And what the government say at that point, or the funders, here's the money, off you go, change the world. That's it. No accountability, no nothing. I'm talking about, 40, 50 years ago or something like that. Yeah? Later on, what happened? The government or the funders were saying, can you show me the receipts at least? How you spend the money? Okay. And you collect all the receipts and say, yeah, we spend the money in the things that we say that we want to spend it. Okay? If you continue moving in that direction, at some point the funders will say, but what is it that you do? Okay, and how many people did you serve? And they are asking for annual reports where you show how many people came through your doors, how many people you served, how many people graduated, that kind of things. And those are the outputs, the things that we count. And that's what you usually put in your annual reports, okay? And then, and that's where we are heading, and we are sort of in that stage now. The funders are asking, okay, you say that your mission was transforming the life of these women. Are you accomplishing that or not? Oh, and that's a deeper question. It's actually a research question. It's not accounting, an accounting exercise. You have to ask, oh, is my program actually having the impact that we say that we're having? And for that, you need a whole design, a whole research design to figure out that. So one thing that we learned from this is that you cannot skip the outcome evaluation. So you want to do an ROI, but you don't know anything about your outcomes? We need to slow down and see what your outcomes are. Can we measure them in a way, okay? And there are some ways of doing it, even if you're not right there yet. And we will talk a little bit about that later. Okay. So how is it that we do this thing? We need to start asking the practical questions or the research questions themselves. And this part of the process is more the consultant that has to do the thinking, but I would like to, usually I like to involve the client a little bit more in that, because we have to be on the same page about assumptions, about you know, what is it that you're doing. I won't show you the formulas and stuff and, whew, you know, too complicated or whatever. But I want you to be aware of the assumptions that we are using and why we are doing these calculations in the way we are doing them. So is it going to be a longitudinal design? Do we have the time and resources to follow up our participants over and over for 6 months, a year, or 2 years? That's one possibility. Or do we have some sort of a comparison group? Okay? You have your participants, and you have a long waiting list of people, and you have tons of information of those individuals, and we can have a nice comparison group, or not. Or you are very, at the beginning of this continuum of the history of funders and evaluation continuum that I was mentioning before. So you are barely counting the people that you're serving. That's all you know. Even worse, you have just a sign-up sheet with not names and emails or phone numbers. That's all you have. So what can we do with that information? So in that case, we need to think about prospective ROI. So what if? Okay, what if you accomplish the things that you're saying that you're going to accomplish, and try to start the whole process from there. So it's not like we cannot do anything if you are in the very, very, very far end of that spectrum and you don't have any data. We can do stuff. We can do some calculations, okay? But we have to be aware of the limitations and what we can do from that. So some very specific numbers that we use in the case of the Jeremiah, we use a very specific cohort of participants for that specific year, 2010. Why 2010? Because it was a nice, regular, kind of a typical year. We don't want to use a year where there were only a few participants or too many participants. We want a regular, sort of a standard year. We could have done it for 3 years of participation, but that requires more data. So there is a trade-off between the time frame and the amount of work that requires to do a larger project. But they do have good information about who graduates. Now, they will probably tell you that information was kind of a little piece of information here, another piece of information there. They have to work really hard to put it together and put it in a nice Excel sheet and send it to me, okay? So there is a lot of work that they had to do just to give me that piece of information. It was a good information, but they have to work really hard to put it together, okay? Now, here's where here's the second generation. What about the benefits that we derive from the children? Now, most of those benefits will happen in the future when the kids actually graduate from high school and so forth. So we're talking, 10 years from now, 15 years, 20 years from now. Okay? Do we know that that's going to happen with those kids? No, we don't. We don't have the time to wait 10 years to do that. So what we did, and this is the typical methodology that we use for this early childhood and other type of programs, we look for evidence that this type of intervention, early childhood education, actually works. And there are a couple, 2 or 3, or probably more than now, studies out there that have actually followed early childhood participants through their whole life until they are 40, 50 years old. And they ask every year or every few years, they ask, well, how you doing? Did you graduate? Have you been in jail? And so forth. So they have collected data for many, many years of these guys. And they have a very nice control group. So it's a very scientific, very foolproof study. So we use the results from that study and ask the question to the Jeremiah program, is your early childhood education program somewhat similar to the Perry School in Chicago, for example? That was one of the studies that we used. Is the curriculum comparable? Do your kids spend more or less the same time, same number of hours that these kids do in the program? So are these two things comparable? And we find, oh yeah, Jeremiah program has a very high quality early childhood education program. So, oh, then we can use these renowned studies and use their results and apply it to the Jeremiah program. There are some itty-bitties about it because it's not like completely 100% apples to apples comparison. We are working with unknowns here, and it's not bulletproof. But there is a way of doing it, and that's how we did the one-child dividend and all these studies that we use. So we combine third-party studies and results with program data and cost data from Minnesota. Like how much does it cost, putting an additional person in jail and that kind of thing. But we need to ask questions like this. What is the unit of analysis? We want a per participant or an aggregate? What is the time frame? 1 year, many years? And the reason we ask this is very important. For example, for early childhood education, we're talking about benefits, lifetime benefits. For workforce programs, we cannot do that. It's really hard. Because what is the holy grail of workforce program? Job retention, right? Because you help these guys find a job, but they are able to keep it for 4 months, 6 months, and then go down again and back and forward and back and forward. So their employment rates are like this. It's really hard, unless it's just a crisis, and then just back on track and that's it. But most of them, they fluctuate a lot. So predicting benefits for more than 3, 4, 5 years is it gets iffy when you try to do that. And the perspective, and Rick talked about that. It's very important which perspective are we going to focus on. So some numbers from the Jeremiah program. These are per participant in thousands. And you can see that we have computed several numbers. This is not a mistake, okay? These are returns for the society. So public assistance is just money from one pocket to the other. So there's no net gain. That's why we don't have a number there. And then we talk about cost. And again, we divide the cost or disaggregate the cost by sources, okay? What you notice here is that they are funded mainly by private money, okay? And this is the actual number that we want to use for the ROI when we add all these things. And this is how the final number comes to be. We divided the total benefits by the total cost per person, and that's your number for the society. How we interpret that number? The society gets back $2.47 for every dollar that is invested in Jeremiah program. That's a very nice number, by the way. Yeah. People have all these huge expectations about ROIs. They want $15, $20, $30. You say, wait, man, try to go to the bank. Have you seen your retirement account lately? What's the return? Even private businesses. What is the return? 5, 10%, 50% is a really nice business. Well, 10%, you're talking 10 cents for every dollar you invest in that business. And people, do social work and they expect 20. Hold on. But you can frame the results in many ways. See, if you don't like to show your funders just a single number because, oh, I paid $10,000 for a number, you can say something like this too, okay? That looks a little bit bigger. But it's the same. It's the same result. Okay? Just telling the story in a different way. So, and this is what you get from different perspectives. Okay? For funders get a nice return. Participants obviously receive a huge. And taxpayers, $66, 66 cents of benefits in a way. Okay? I'll leave you with that. You can interpret that as you wish.